Bungalow Bill here, and welcome back to From the Depths. Today, we're going to be talking about tilt rotor craft or tilt jet craft, and in particular, the needs for very high performance variants. And this will be a little bit more general towards just tilting propulsion and how to treat tilting propulsion in a way that works in more extreme cases. So not things like azipods on slow ships, not things like tilt rotors that primarily keep a craft airborne but do not provide much other control. It's really how to mix the different signals to get the response that you want. This may go well beyond From the Depths as well if you play another building game that also has propulsion that allows you to tilt it in different directions. So this is not a craft that I built, this is the quadrupole. It's probably the most well-known example of a tilt jet craft. It doesn't really work that well. It's okay, it does function. What it does is not really viable in extreme cases. If you look, all of these have angle controls to different MISC inputs that come from a breadboard. And then, see if I can get this without hopping to the subconstruct. And then all of these have upset, and that's pretty much it. So if these things are not being used to help the craft stay airborne, they will not do their job. The actual breadboard, if you ever feel like looking at it, lives here. What it does, there's a little bit of magic in it that is just sort of a crude way to hack things together to work a little bit better, but it's very close to just adding up the different inputs with different signs and different factors to get you into the different drives. There's this little bit of weirdness that attempts to pivot them back down if you need more upwards thrust, at least as far as I can tell. That's what it's trying to do. As for what it actually does, it can do a lot of it can do a lot of things. It can really do a lot of things. So we'll not dwell on it for too long. I was not able to find good examples of other people's quads. If you have one that works really well, feel free to tell me about it, send me a workshop link, that sort of thing. I looked through the Discord, I looked through the Reddit, I looked through the workshop. All that I found were people saying these craft are gimmicky. So I'm going to jump straight into a demo and show what I built, show the sort of performance you can get out of it, to give an idea of the motivations, and then we'll dig into how to integrate the breadboard into your own vehicles, as well as how the breadboard functions if you need to modify it or you want to improve on it. Alright, so here is one of my prototype quads. It is incredibly stripped down and incredibly high thrust. The thrust is actually a little bit overtuned for the PIDs, so you can see it pushes itself down sometimes. In general, high thrust quads are very, very difficult to make function, which is why I made this one so high thrust. It actually has a top speed of, this isn't its top speed, it goes up to 195 meters per second. And there is not much to it, so we're going to have to put it on God mode, because for whatever reason, despite the fact that it's slower than its flames, it will torch itself sometimes with its flamer. And if an enemy hits it with anything, it's going to explode, because it is totally unarmored. That is the one real defect to a quad, is that it is very, very hard to armor properly. So I'll spawn in a few vehicles to see what kind of things that it can intercept and the way that it does it. One of the craft I would like to do is the Enigma Swarm. The reason that the Enigma Swarm is interesting is because it has a lot of sub-vehicles that it's going to have to jet around to. Of course, first it's going to take out the main vehicle, and it's going to take it a while. It has to burn it out. After it's done that, it'll burn out the sub-vehicles, and that'll be a little bit more interesting. So it's using the point at and maintain distance AI with my custom breadboard on top of it to move the quads. So you can see it's doing just that. It approaches a little bit aggressively, backs off. It doesn't have compensation for control system delay, which these quads need to rotate to a direction before they can provide thrust. And the actual AI itself does not compensate for that. I really want to try my hand, once I do the math, at a few improved breads for things like circle at a distance, interception, that sort of thing, that have some control system delay built into them, so that they have smoother approaches than this. But you can see it's actually quite agile. It can stick to very small targets, it can turn quickly, it can accelerate and deaccelerate quickly. Its only real issue is that it doesn't compensate for the control system delay. Of course, the lower performance the craft is, the heavier it is, the less noticeable this is going to be because the more time it's going to spend accelerating and decelerating. It can even aggressively thrust downwards. It's something you will not see very often on quads because that gets you into trouble very quickly. It can perform fairly extreme maneuvers without losing roll or pitch authority. That's actually one of the primary things that was built into this craft, is the ability to avoid losing roll or pitch authority when going at full burn. You'll often see issues with from the depths vehicles where you get saturation on your control outputs and it causes you to lose roll or pitch authority. On vehicles, the AI will ask for more than you can give. It'll ask for full roll and full up, and you can't do that at the same time. So for every design decision that I made on the Spreadboard, I always chose to maintain full authority over rotation rather than maximizing the propulsion values. This will lead to the craft being a bit slower sometimes, but in exchange, it is far more stable, and if you're trying to make a craft this high performance, it is required. So it can also shoot at slow ships. It's actually very different from interceptors. Being able to hover reliably targeting slow ships is sort of its own skill set and another test case for things like PID tuning so it doesn't dunk itself in the water. You could see it came rather close. I could tune it to be a little bit better there. Make sure that the PIDs aren't over-tuned so that it doesn't wobble. When you're targeting flying vehicles that are moving, it's very easy to tune your PIDs very aggressively, and then you face a slow-moving target like this, and your craft wobbles a lot. You can see that we're doing a lot of very slow adjustments. We're strafing because of these, not because of the quad itself. So you can see that we're doing a lot of very small roll and pitch adjustments, sometimes larger than others, especially if we get hit by a cram or that sort of thing. I don't know if there's going to be another cram shell, but every time we were hit by a cram, we did some much larger maneuvers. So most of the time, our jets are staying fairly static and really just modulating thrust very slightly. When we took a bigger hit, we were actually flipping jets over. It took a lot of... The Spreadboard is fairly simple, but it took a lot of effort and a lot of testing to get a craft that could actually flip the jets all the way over without losing control. So there's really just one other type of craft that I want to show, and it's very bad at shooting down flyers. We'll start with the Aurora. The Aurora is pretty easy, and then we'll try some other ones later. So it's very bad at shooting down flyers because it's using a flamer. The speed and range on the flamer is just, even though this is a max range flamer, it's just a little bit low. With the distance that it hovers at and the speed that it's going here, it's losing about half of its flamer range. So it'll get something like the Aurora eventually. It will not get some of the faster craft. It also doesn't have a very smart interception AI, so it doesn't try to head off vehicles. The point at and maintain distance will cut throttle too aggressively sometimes. So even though this is very high thrust, very fast, you'll see it not do what it can do. But we'll still get some glimpses of what this is actually capable of. So let's spawn in something a little faster. There are faster things than the Higgsy. I think the Gannets are a little faster. So we can perform very aggressive turns. We did not really do so there. We also don't try to cut the corners. We can keep up with jets, though. We have a massive amount of thrust, and we can vector it in a lot of different ways. So really, you can build one of these, especially if you build in maybe a few control surfaces, but you have all of the benefits of a jet, but you can also hover in place. You can do very interesting things while you're hovering in place as well, like dodge downwards very quickly. You really have an incredible amount of pitch and roll authority that jets don't have as well. So there is probably some interesting thing that I can do in that regard. We don't take good advantage of it here because it's not built into our maneuvering routine, so we're yawing instead, which is actually something that we're slightly poorer at. But we really bring in all the benefits of a jet and a lot of other upsides as well. And like a lot of VTOLs you see on the Steam Workshop, or rather unlike them, or that I have seen in the past, we don't have to switch between hover and forward mode. We smoothly transition between the two. So let's put us into formation mode.
Moving out.
And that'll let me just try to go to a few places. Now, since we don't have any control system delay compensation, we are going to have trouble coming to a total stop. That's partially a PID tuning thing. You'll find that difficult no matter what control you use. It's particularly difficult for our craft, but this is a good way to sort of show the different maneuvers that it's capable of.
Moving out. Listening. Moving out.
And how agile it can be.
Moving out.
Okay, let's talk about how to integrate this with your craft. It's actually pretty simple. You need 4 spin blocks. They need to be named the same way that these are. So BL, BR, FR, and FL. And they need their angle control to be totally disabled. And their spin rate control should be maximized. These need to be controlled entirely by generic block setters on the breadboard and not by the craft itself. Similarly, you need jet controllers on them that have the same naming, and similarly, they are not controlled by the AI, they are only controlled by the breadboard. And that's it. If you want to use some other type of propulsion other than CJEs, give them the same name, and go in here and remap these generic block setters from jet controllers to whatever you have of the same name. And that's really it. You can add other stuff controlled by the AI that does static thrust. So these do pushers left and right. You could put backups for pitch or forwards or other types of controls. And you can mix and match a lot. We'll go into breadboard customization later if you want to control different axes or have thrusters on different locations, or just build a craft that's totally different but still use some sort of ASI-jet or ASI-thrust. Okay, let's look at how this craft is designed so that you can understand how the breadboard works and have a little bit of thought behind integration or, with a variety of vehicles, or customization, or, modification if you want to improve. So a lot of the time, static thrust looks a lot like this. It works in these cardinal directions. You'd have one here that controls maybe yaw, forwards. That's pretty much all that you can get off of it. You might have this one which controls up and down, pitch, and roll. So really you have this axis that controls those 3 different components, and you have this axis that controls those 2 different components. Now, if I want to turn these into one swiveling thrust, I don't just want to put a subconstruct spin block here and say, oh yeah, I'm going to take the sub-object, it's going to be the spin block, it'll be pointing down, so the thrust is going to be pointing down most of the time. But oh, maybe if I'm going forwards, I want it to turn this way. If I want to pitch, maybe I'll turn it this way. If I want to roll, I'll turn it this way. If I want to yaw, I'll turn it this way. There's really no way to make that work. You can't just add these together. You'll never quite get what you want. The real way to look at it is maybe, okay, I'm being requested for 4 units of thrust up, and I'm being requested for 2 units of thrust back. So I want to take those 2 together, and the 4 units of thrust up is going to be me adding the vertical components. So I'll take the pitch, the roll, the up with their various components, whether they're positive or negative, depending on where on the craft this is. I'm going to add them all together. I'm going to take the horizontal axis and take its components with whatever sign they have, so forwards and strafe, and add those up and get some direction. And then I'm going to add the 2 vectors together to get 1 vector in total that will end around here. I'll figure out what angle that goes through. And then I'll spin the subconstruct to that direction. Then I'll calculate the magnitude of that vector and set the overall thrust to that magnitude so that when I break down the components to the individual directions, I get the thrust that's being requested. So That's actually pretty simple, and is exactly what I do here. So Spreadboard, it does have a lot of components, but that's because you can't make just reusable functions, so everything is duplicated across 4 different drives. And there's really no way around that. But what it does is fairly straightforward. Forgive this stuff, it doesn't actually do anything anymore. It was an initial attempt at control saturation that I did correctly back here later, which we'll get into. So what I really have here is I've just got my inputs, and then I have the different signs that I need for the inputs. So you'll notice the three components, these correspond to vertical drives. The 2 components correspond to horizontal drives. On one side, the left side, my forward and yaw commands are both positive. On the right side, my forward and yaw commands have forward being positive and yaw being negative. We can see the yaw comes in here, the forward comes in here. Similarly, up is positive for all of my upwards components, and then my roll and pitch is mixed based on whether they're in the front and the back or the left and the right. And this is all things that you do with normal static thrust. Here, you have to do it in the breadboard, but it's really not any different. And if you want to move these thrusters around on your vehicles, all that you have to do is figure out which components you want, put them in here with the proper sign. After that, we need to calculate the angle for the spin block. The easiest way to calculate the angle of a vector like this is with the arctangent function. The spin blocks on the 2 sides rotate in different directions, so one's negative, the other one's positive. That's the only reason that the signs are there. The other thing is the magnitude. I could turn it into a vector and use the magnitude function that they have, but I just decided to use the distance function because it's really easy, the square root of the sum of the squares. That's the total magnitude of requested thrust. This can go quite high. So, you can add all these together and you can get 3. You can add all these together, get 2. It's going to add up to a bit less than 5 here. We can't give that as a drive. So we do something else. And really what I do is I keep track of the maximum requested drive. So however high the highest one of these is, will get reported here, 1 if none of them go above 1. And then I'm going to take everything else and I'm going to divide it by that requested number. So that, let's say my highest requested drive was 3. That I wanted something to go up for every drive component. So roll, pitch, up, they're all maxed out for this and they're all telling it to go up. So that tells me 3. Now, to maintain the requested pitch balances for the rest of my craft, I'm not going to get that if I'm saturating this drive. So what I actually do is I just divide everything by the maximum requested thrust. So not just this one, but everything. So if this one was requested as a 3, it's going to scale back to a 1. If the other ones are all 1, they're going to scale back to a 3rd. And this is going to keep the requested ratios the same as what the breadboard was asking for. It's going to make me lose total outputted thrust, but will maintain the ratios of the thrust. And the ratios of the thrust is what's important. The other thing that's going on here is that for me to have these pods be able to swing around, let's say that we're going full burn forwards, and all of a sudden it requests full burn backwards. Well, some of these thrusters, depending on slight deviations in angle, will swing through the bottom, and some are going to swing through to the top. And if I immediately turn these thrusters on for the full back while they're tilting, we'll roll very heavily. The best case will just go up or down really hard. The worst case will flip over. With how high thrust this is, that's exactly what happens a lot of the time. The way that we fight this is that I read the actual angles that are coming out of these blocks. I compare that to the requested number going into the blocks. I figure out the difference. There's 2 components to this because there's 2 different ways to rotate around a circle, and we take the shortest one of the 2. I then look to see the maximum deviation of any thruster from its requested. I shove it into a function that kind of smooths it out a little bit, and basically it makes it so that if we're near the requested angle, we'll give full thrust, If we're far away from the requested angle, we'll give 0 thrust, and we'll blend it between the two. It does require it to be fairly close to the angle to give any thrust, though, because things go very wrong very quickly. So if the AI requests a very, very sharp change in attitude, the craft will drop for a little bit because it will cut thrust entirely. Ideally, an AI to be very well compatible with these systems would always smoothly vary the outputs that it asks for. The in-game AIs will not do that, so they will have some issues, but they still work pretty well. So after I've done all that, I set the propulsion values, and that's it. That's all that there is to the breadboard, and that gets you a fairly well-functioning quad. There's probably some things you can do to make it work slightly better, but what I really think the next step is to build some better control schemes that take some of these thrust delays into account, and do some stuff that's in some ways a little bit smarter than what the built-in AI is capable of. So anyway, that's all that I have for today. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I'll see you in the future.